On November 17, 1989, 15,000 students formed a protest in Prague, Czechoslovakia, to fight against the repressive communist system they were currently living under. This protest was a turning point in the resistance of communism by the citizens of Czechoslovakia and sparked the Velvet Revolution, a 10-day act of resistance against the communist regime. Although it was short, the revolution was successful in removing the Communist Party from control. This led to the creation of two new democratic countries, ushered in a new era of nonviolent revolutions, and continues to inspire people to be politically involved today. In 1939, Nazi forces invaded and occupied Czechoslovakia, a country made of two main ethnic groups, Czechs and Slovaks. Following World War II, the Soviet-backed Communist Party seized control, and for the next 20 years, Czechoslovakia operated under a strict communist regime. The regime invaded citizens' privacy to search for and punish people with anti-communist beliefs. Over 200 political dissidents were executed, and more were thrown into labor camps, which crushed any opposition in the country. In 1968, the USSR gave leadership of Czechoslovakia to Alexander Dubček, who increased citizens' freedom of speech and freedom of press rights. These acts of liberalism are known as the Prague Spring. By August, the USSR realized a more liberal Czechoslovakia would be a threat to its worldwide power. Not wanting to lose control, they sent around 500,000 Warsaw Pact troops to invade Czechoslovakia. The invasion was successful in stopping student-led protests, reversing Dubček's actions, and replacing Dubček with Soviet loyalist Gustav Husak. A decade later, 35 countries, including Czechoslovakia, came together to sign the Helsinki Accords. The purpose of these accords was to lessen Cold War tensions and decrease human rights abuses. Dissidents in Czechoslovakia, including Václav Havel, an anti-communist playwright, vowed to hold the Communist Party accountable to their commitment of upholding human rights. After the arrest and unfair trial of a political rock band, Václav Havel and two other dissidents wrote Charter 77, which was drafted as a way for citizens to ensure the government was following the Helsinki Accords. The Charter states, responsibility for the maintenance of civic rights in our country naturally devolves, in the first place, on the political and state authorities. Yet, not only on them, everyone bears his share of responsibility for the conditions that prevail. Over 200 dissidents signed Charter 77, and it quickly gained international media coverage. Although the document was successful in gaining international support, in Czechoslovakia, the Communist Party cracked down on dissidents, specifically the ones who signed the charter, and increased human rights abuses. One of the original signers died following an intense police interrogation, and others were arrested and dismissed from their current jobs. This pushed resistance efforts in Czechoslovakia underground for the next decade, until 1989. Throughout 1989, small public protests began in Prague due to other anti-communist movements across Eastern Europe. Primarily dissidents who were prepared for the punishments of openly speaking up about their political opinions protested the communist regime. Police fought back using water cannons and batons, crushing these protests. In November, a different revolution happened roughly 200 miles away, the Berlin Wall, which is separating Communist Germany from liberal Germany for 2 decades, was demolished on November 9, 1989. Citizens in Czechoslovakia heard about the wall over TV stations and radio. Despite warnings on TV that nothing similar would be tolerated in Czechoslovakia, there was a new feeling of hope in the air, knowing that the fall of communism was not only possible, but close. It took only 8 days for Czechoslovakia to follow into Germany's footsteps. On November 17, 1989, a march was held to honor 9 students who died when Nazis took over the University of Prague in 1939. The government wanted to ban the march due to the recent citizen uprising in Germany that led to the fall of communism, but eventually they allowed it to run. After the ceremony, a few hundred students stuck around. The students started to shout, "To Wenslav Square!" and the reaction was contagious. The students ran to the city center, but when they arrived, they were immediately confronted by riot police. The police blocked off escape routes before beating the protesters. Protesters lit candles, gave flowers to the riot control police, and chanted, "We have bare hands," to show that they didn't want to return the brutality.
So when I came back after the weekend, the friend that went, she told me that she got hit a few times and she was very upset, and it was something that affected her for several days. She kind of couldn't shake it off.
By the next day, news had started to spread about the students who were injured at the protest, with rumors of one who was thought to have been killed. Although this rumor was later debunked, violence against the protesters angered citizens, shifting their involvement and creating a revolution. When the majority of the population joined the protests, this changed the tide of the resistance movement, creating a turning point in the fight against communism in Czechoslovakia. By November 20th, people with differing levels of political involvement were flooding the streets, this time not met with violence. People would bring their house keys and jingle them at the protest in Wenslaw Square to show support, and the sound of jingling keys soon became the sound of the movement. By the 24th, the crowds had grown to 300,000. Václav Havel, co-author of Charter 77, addressed the protesters from a balcony overlooking the square and stated, "We will never return to the old system of totalitarian rule." On November 25th, 800,000 people came to a protest in Prague, where they had to relocate to a nearby park to accommodate for the numbers. After 10 days of consecutive nonviolent protests and strikes, the Communist Party announced on November 28th they would resign. On the 29th of December in 1989, Václav Havel was elected President of Czechoslovakia by a unanimous vote from the Federal Assembly. With the peaceful end of protests and a new president elected, the Velvet Revolution came to a close and communism officially fell. Almost immediately, the citizens of Czechoslovakia gained more freedom than they had seen since 1948. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of press rights were just a few of the rights that were increased. Citizens were also free to own their own businesses and property, as well as travel and live where they pleased.
That's the biggest change, I think. Just be able to travel, get to know the world, and learn different languages, and just kind of be kind of free.
Following the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, Czechoslovakia had to make decisions on their new government. Political leaders from the differing ethnic groups, the Czechs and Slovaks, had differing opinions on how they should govern. According to polls at the time, 11% of Slovaks and 6% of Czechs wanted the split to happen, with most being neutral. In 1992, Czechoslovakia split peacefully into the Czech Republic and Slovakia, known as the Velvet Divorce, for it too was non-violent and bloodless. Inspired by the Velvet Revolution, a series of different revolutions broke out in formerly USSR Eastern European countries in the 2000s. Revolutions in Georgia, Belarus, and Ukraine, known as the Color Revolutions, occurred against Soviet-style authoritarianism in hopes to change to democracy. The Velvet Revolution is considered to be the first color revolution, marking a shift from only dissidents to mass citizen participation to fight for freedom. Today, the Velvet Revolution continues to inspire people in the Czech Republic and Slovakia to protest unjust government systems. In 2014, there was a protest against Miloš Zeman, the former Czech president. He had never been that popular among the Czech population and had recently upset citizens by praising Russian and Chinese leaders, triggering memories of their own communist days. People were asked to bring red cards to Wenslaw Square. "We are saying that President Zeman should be given the red card and thrown out of the game," Martin Przykryl, the organizer of the protest, said. One protester named Katerina Sesingerova was carrying her 7-year-old daughter through the protest, as she recalled her mother bringing her to the protests in 1989. She thought it was important for her daughter to have a similar experience. "I wanted her to see what sometimes people have to do to win their freedom, and to keep it."